If someone had told me years ago that my marriage was a lie, I would have laughed in their face. I was in love with Richard, and I believed he loved me too. We had a comfortable life, free from major worries. I never had to stress about money, not because I was reckless with it, but because I grew up with parents who ensured I had stability. My father built a business empire from scratch, and when he passed away, he left me a substantial inheritance. But to me, that was always just a safety net. I met Richard at a business conference. He was charming, confident, with that effortless smile that made anyone feel special. He won me over quickly. After 6 months of an intense relationship, he proposed to me during a trip to Napa Valley. I said yes without hesitation. The first year was perfect. Romantic dinners, trips, plans for the future. Richard was attentive, and he seemed genuinely happy by my side. But little by little, small things started to change. He began making financial decisions without consulting me, suggesting questionable investments, mentioning opportunities that would supposedly grow our wealth. At first, I thought it was just excitement, but he always spoke as if our financial security was at risk, which was never the case. Over time, I noticed he avoided certain conversations. If I brought up having kids, he brushed it off. If I mentioned slowing down to focus on a simpler life, he changed the subject. But what truly bothered me was the way he talked about money. As if it were his, as if it were a resource to be exploited, not something I had inherited and wanted to protect. I ignored these red flags because I wanted to believe in the love we had. I wanted to believe he was with me for who I was, not for what I owned. But everything collapsed on an ordinary afternoon. I was organizing paperwork in my home office when I found an envelope I didn't recognize. Inside was a contract. At the top, Richard's name. On the second line, the name of a lawyer. It was a document drafted before our wedding, outlining how, by marrying me, Richard would gain access to my fortune. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a plan. I sat there, holding that paper, feeling my heart sink. Everything we had lived. Was it all just an act? I could confront him. I could cry, scream, demand answers. But no, that would be too easy for him. Richard deceived me, but he had no idea what I had just discovered, and I wasn't going to do anything. Not yet. That night, I lay beside Richard like I always did. He was asleep within minutes. I, on the other hand, remained still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of the revelation in my hands. It wasn't just the contract. After finding it, I spent hours digging through the office files. I discovered emails exchanged between Richard and his lawyer before the wedding, where he openly discussed how to ensure my assets would become shared. Phrases like, "Once we're married, it'll be a natural process to take over the finances," and "I need this clause to work in my favor in case of a divorce," made me feel sick. The cruelest part? He never loved me. From the very beginning, everything was calculated. Even the romantic proposal. I found out that just days before, he had emailed his lawyer saying, "Things are going according to plan. We'll be married soon." How could I have been so blind? In the days that followed, I watched Richard differently. Before, I saw a devoted husband, someone who cared about our future. Now, I saw a manipulator, a cold man who knew exactly how to reel me in to get what he wanted. And every little thing I used to ignore suddenly made sense. Like how he had insisted so much on not signing a prenup. At the time, I thought it was romantic. He said, "Marriage isn't about money," and naive as I was, I felt loved because of it. But now, reading those documents, I saw the truth. Also started remembering all the times he suggested risky investments, always trying to convince me it was best for us. The times he dismissed my dreams of a simpler life because we had a certain standard to maintain. And most of all, I remembered the moment the first crack in our marriage appeared. 6 months ago, I mentioned that I wanted to slow down at work, maybe invest in something smaller, something that would bring me joy. I never forgot the look he gave me that day, a mix of frustration and fear. Back then, I thought it was just concern. Now, I understood that to him, it was a threat to his plan. He never wanted a life with me. He wanted a ticket to a luxurious future, funded by me. I'm not a vengeful person, never have been. But in that moment, I realized revenge wasn't about hate or resentment. It was about justice, about giving Richard exactly what he had planned for me. The first thing I did was act like nothing had happened. I was careful. I kept smiling, kissing him goodbye before work, listening to his stories about meetings and business deals I knew had never really worked out. I didn't give him a single reason to suspect anything was wrong. In fact, I made an effort to be even more affectionate. But behind that facade, I was already tearing down his house of cards. First, I changed access to my bank accounts. I still trusted my family lawyer, so I had him restructure all my investments and assets without Richard noticing. It was easier than I thought. He never paid attention to financial details, as long as the money kept flowing. Then I started selling off some of the properties under my name, converting the funds into protected investments. If Richard thought he was going to inherit an easy, accessible fortune, he was in for a rude awakening. But the riskiest part of the plan came a few weeks later. One night after dinner, I casually mentioned that a company we had shares in was struggling. I watched his reaction carefully. He frowned, grabbed his phone, and started looking it up. Within minutes, he was talking about how we should sell part of our portfolio before it lost value. That was all the confirmation I needed. He didn't care about the marriage, only the money. So I pushed further. I started suggesting that maybe we should cut back on expenses, avoid unnecessary purchases, maybe even sell the house and downsize. At first, Richard laughed at the idea. But after a few weeks, when the spending tightened and investments became more restricted, he grew restless. He started hinting that I should find a way to fix our financial situation, that maybe it was time to take some risks, that maybe he should take control of our money since he seemed to understand it better than I did. That was the first time in months I had to hold myself back from revealing everything at once. Instead, I played hesitant. I told him I trusted him, but I just needed more time to think. He accepted it, convinced I was vulnerable. What he didn't know was that by the following week, I would have absolute proof of who he really was. A few days before our wedding anniversary, I made my final move. I told him that, due to legal issues, a significant portion of my wealth had been frozen in an ongoing lawsuit involving my family's company. I made up an entire story about how we might not have access to most of our money for months. And that's when I saw Richard's true face with absolute clarity. He didn't try to comfort me. He didn't say it would be okay. He didn't assure me that we'd get through it together, no matter what. He was furious. He told me I should have planned better, that we might have to sell some things, including the house. And worst of all, he let it slip that he should have married someone else. Right then, I knew I had already won, and in just a few days, I was going to destroy everything he thought he had built. Richard's downfall came sweeter than I could have ever imagined. He just didn't know that he was about to lose everything. On the morning of our anniversary, I woke up before him and looked at the face of the man I once thought I loved. He was sleeping soundly, unaware that by the end of the day, his world would come crashing down. I made breakfast as usual, served his coffee exactly how he liked it, and sat across from him, watching as he scrolled through his phone. In the past few days, I'd noticed he was more distant, always texting someone. I had a hunch. "You seem stressed. Everything okay?" I asked, my voice sounding innocent. He sighed and shook his head. "Just work. Nothing serious." Lies. I knew exactly what was going on. Ever since I fabricated the story about blocking my fortune, Richard had become restless, impatient, and started acting strangely. He would leave to handle things, spend hours on the phone, and come back home angrier than ever. Then, the night before, I did something I never imagined I would. I installed a tracking app on his phone. I wanted proof before making my final move. And I didn't have to wait long. After breakfast, he rushed out, saying he had a meeting. The tracker showed that he went straight to a hotel downtown. My heart raced, but it wasn't out of sadness. It was adrenaline. I drove over there, and as soon as I arrived, I saw what I'd suspected. Richard was sitting in the lobby, talking to a tall, blonde woman in high heels. They were close, laughing. And when he took her hand, I had my confirmation. My husband, who'd spent the last few months trying to take my money, was already preparing his escape. He didn't plan on staying with me if the money was actually blocked. He was securing another opportunity. I could have confronted them right there. I could have caused a scene, but that wouldn't have been enough. I wanted Richard to lose everything. That afternoon, I went home and set my final plan into motion. "Richard, we need to talk," I said when he arrived. He looked at me with fake concern. "Is everything okay?" I sighed, as if defeated. "I think you're right. We need to sell some things. And maybe it's best if we take some time apart." I saw the spark in his eyes, like he was relieved, like he had just gotten rid of the burden I represented. "I didn't want it to be this way," he lied, touching my hand. "But I understand. If that's what's best for you," I smiled. "Don't worry, everything will be sorted out pretty quickly." What he didn't know was that, while we were talking, my lawyer had already sent over all the paperwork. Our marriage was over, and Richard, who'd planned so hard to secure my fortune, wouldn't see a penny. The next morning, Richard woke up late. I was already sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and waiting for him to come downstairs. When he showed up, I noticed he seemed relaxed. He thought everything was under control. As he grabbed a cup of coffee, his expression betrayed a false sense of security. He thought he had won, that by suggesting the separation and showing indifference, he could leave the relationship exactly as planned, with enough money to start over, maybe, with another woman who would be more convenient. The envelope was already on the table when he sat down. Without saying a word, I pushed the papers toward him and waited. At first, he skimmed through the pages, disinterested, as if it were just a formality. But as he read, his posture changed. The slight shrug of his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around the papers, the furrowing of his brow. When he realized what it was, he dropped the documents as if they had burned his hands. The shock was immediate. The divorce agreement not only confirmed that the separation was final, but it also established that he would leave with nothing. Not a dime, no property, no benefits he had assumed were guaranteed. For a few moments, he stood still. It was as if he were trying to process the blow, reevaluating every step that had brought him to that point. Then came the frustration, the look of someone searching for an escape, a way to turn the tables. He started pacing around the kitchen, looking for arguments, some legal loophole that could reverse the situation. But there was none. The manipulation attempt came soon after. He tried softening his voice, showing remorse, maybe even rehearsing an apology. But there was no response. Everything he said sounded predictable and empty. Not long after, I grabbed my keys and left the house without looking back. Richard stood there, powerless, as I walked out. For the first time, he understood what it was like to be discarded when you no longer served someone else's interests. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't losing anything. I was finally getting myself back. If you like this story and want more accounts like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below. Do you think Richard got what he deserved, or should he have faced even worse consequences? I'd love to know your opinion. See you in the next video.